and consequences, right? God's saying, if you do X, Y, and Z, life will be wonderful, good, and you will prosper and live long, and everything will be hunky-dory, as my mother would probably say, right? But the other shoe drops. If you don't, then life will be miserable, and exile and punishment and war and famine and all sorts of horrible things. This is a section of the Torah that actually, in a traditional synagogue, when the Torah is chanted tomorrow, it is chanted in a whisper. The list of curses in this Parshat, because they're so so bad, and we're going to look at.
Do the kids do that?
No.
Oh,
the kids do not. It's also the kids do not. And I think one of the interesting things, and perhaps we'll have a bit of a discussion about this before we get into what I prepared, is, do we believe this, right? That if we live good lives and play by the rules, that we will be rewarded, and if we don't, we'll be punished. Anybody believe that, Merle?
I don't, it kind of goes back to why bad things happen to good people. That's what it hits me with first. And, there have been times in my life where something's happened and I've said, not so nicely, but why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve it? And a lot of it is how we're treated by others. Not necessarily health, or it's mostly how are we treated by others, and where do they get this from? Where does it come from that they feel they have the right to treat people the way they do?
I think it's the way you began, right? It gets to the question of why bad things happen to good people. So, many people may have seen that Rabbi Harold Kushner died 2 weeks ago now, maybe 10 days ago.
Yeah.
Right. And his first, I see you, Susan, his arguably most noted and famous book, many people mistakenly think is called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, but it's not. Title of the book is When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Right. Everybody wants to read why bad things happen to good people, but nobody can write that book. And among other things, his thesis is the question is not why me. The question is really what now, right? What do we do when bad things happen? Because we know that they do, and we know that they will. And I think an interesting question is, so how does this Torah portion fit into a context in which we know that bad things happen to good people, and we know that seemingly good things happen to horrible people? And I gave a sermon a long time ago about this Torah portion, sort of in essence saying, our ancestors were wrong, right? And the Torah is wrong. But I don't think so, right? They had to know. They had to know that, there are people who, despite living righteous, wonderful lives, have seemingly horrible things happen to them. And there are people who lie and cheat and steal and yet somehow appear to prosper, right? They lived they lived around other human beings. They had to know that. So knowing that, as we know, how does this still become something that resonates with them? Susan, and then Penina.
Oh, I thought I lowered my hand. I was going to say the same thing to you, and certainly that is an unending question, because there's no answer specific to it. But what I read Harold Kushner's book a while ago, and I think it's wonderful what we do. And there are interesting in some cases when bad people do bad things, things can have repercussions. Even though they may be enjoying the high life for a time, that can happen. And good people are good people, and we just have to say, I don't know, because there's no answer. We have to say, this is how am I going to get through this? Is really
no. It's very true. Some of you heard me probably use this example before. I don't. No, it's not here. It's in the office. Family friend of ours, of my family's. It's a guy named Mitchell, W. Mitchell, who's a motivational speaker. He wrote a book called "It's Not What Happens to You; It's What You Do About It," and that's sort of his slogan. This is a guy who was in a motorcycle accident in San Francisco. He collided with a mail truck, and the gas tank on the mail truck exploded, and he suffered third-degree burns over like 85% of his body or something horrific like that. So disfigured significantly. And then 3 years later was in a single-engine plane crash and wound up paralyzed from the waist down. Right. And he, I think no one would fault him for having a pessimistic outlook on life after such horrific things happening to him. He famously likes to say, look, before there were 10,000 things I could do. Now there are 9,000. I can focus on the 1,000 things I lost, or I can focus on the 9,000 things that I have left, and I choose to focus on those, right? And he will tell you that he lives a wonderful and blessed life, despite, certainly not because of what happened to him, but despite it. It's what we do about it. It's the meaning we make from the suffering and the horrible things that transpire, right? Rabbi Leader in 3 books ago, I guess now, right? That one I do have here. In any case, right? The beauty of what remains, I think it was, says, right, that sooner or later everyone walks through hell, and the goal should be not to come out empty-handed, right? It should not be for nothing. Penina.
Which piece exactly are we talking about now? About the Aaron and his sons, or how to treat the land? Which part of the parsha are we discussing?
Great. I was talking about the beginning of Behukotai, and I'm going to put a text up in a second.
Okay.
But the beginning of yeah.
Okay. I'm going to approach now just the section that tells you what to do, that if you're going to plow your field,
right. Yeah.
All this stuff. Okay. I couldn't get into the Zoom yesterday, and I wanted to kind of like clarify the way I looked at it. I'm asking a question. What makes him go to Egypt to begin with? Why did they go to Egypt to begin with? Because there was a famine.
Mm-hmm.
So now he's telling them that if you're going to plow and if you're going to take care of the land, you are going to avoid this reason that took you down to Egypt. You're going to be on your land. You're going to have your own country. And looking at other tribes that were erased from the map because they didn't have a country, and the ones who settled still there till today, like the Vikings in Denmark, over there is a whole city that they have statues of all the ancient Vikings as the people that started the settlement. So in order to save and stay where you are and avoid going down again and take a chance of becoming slaves again, you'll have your own land. So work at it. Plant trees, take care. The fact with the land that it has to rest after 7 years, they are proving today that if you change the crops, you don't have to do that. But
right.
At the time, they saw it as a solution for the land to rest and produce again.
Just a bit of context, Penny, for everybody. That's right. So the first parsha of this double Parshat Bahar, begins with instructions about the Jubilee year and the sabbatical.
Right. So this is what I'm trying to
lay
address
fallow
right now. So
every
that was
7 years. And yes, you point out
right.
correctly
Just because you have to remember that famine took them down to Egypt. So
Right.
what they're trying to prevent now is another famine. Stay there, work at it, you'll have your own land. The connection to become a farmer was right away in the desert, was given to them, because they had to be prepared that this is the thing that's going to tie them to the land,
Mhm.
to connect them. So if they work it, they make it their own. And that's the secret of staying there and not having to go down again and become slaves.
You're right. And that, I think that
Or wander
connection to the
country
land,
as well. Yeah.
that connection to the land, interestingly, I think manifests itself in these, blessings and curses and consequences that present themselves in Behukotai, because in large part, not exclusively, but in large part, the reward and the punishment, as it were, is tied to that, is tied to,
It's
the
exactly.
land going to be desolate. Are you going to
Yes.
have, food to eat?
That's right.
You will if things go well, and you
Yeah.
will if they don't. Ben.
So you go back to where you started. So what's
Yep.
the use? This is the whole instruction is make a connection, stay there, live off of it. That's it.
Thank you, Rabbi Penina. I was thinking about how we talked about the land laying rest for every 7 year, which is, good sort of land management science. And I wonder, they didn't have basic understanding, of science or biology or things. And then we go back to the rules of kashrut also, and, cleanliness or what have you. How did these things get these ideas without having those scientific background? That to me is an interesting question. I'm not going to answer it here, Rabbi. I don't expect a quick answer for that one, but
I love when people ask me questions and then thankfully don't expect me to have an answer.
no answer required.
But I will give a little bit of one, which is to say, and this is based on my own just sense of things. I would say observation, right? As a friend of mine likes to say, I've done the research, right? If you're a farmer and you have been farming, your family's been farming for 50 years, and you start noticing that you're planting artichokes in the same field year after year after year, and there's a decline in the crop, maybe you try planting it next door and realize it grows fine, and you plant something else there, right? Trial and error to a certain extent, I think, is maybe part of this. Not when it comes to kashrut, but I agree. I think it's there are actually many things that our ancestors stipulated or suggested that here 2 millennia later we can prove from a scientific standpoint that clearly they couldn't, right? But I think they observed it, right? They may not have been able to have evidence in the way that we do,
right?
But they were human beings just as we are, and certainly learned from their experiences, one would hope.
Some good, excuse my pronunciation, some good seichel.
Exactly. No, it's true, and yeah, and look, and some of it. Trying to think of an example, but some of it is, sort of rudimentary, and we sort of laugh at, what there's a whole Parshat, right, in which that talks about mothers and childbirth, and in the section of the Talmud that discusses that Torah portion, the rabbis have this whole conversation, and they say, if you take a bag of grain and you hold it upside down, the grain falls out. And yet somehow a woman is able to walk upright carrying a baby for 9 months, and the baby doesn't fall out. Now, we can laugh and think that's utterly ridiculous, right? But in their world, if you think about it, that is, why doesn't that happen, right? That's amazing in a way. And I think it's always, to me, interesting when today we are able to sort of demonstrate the wisdom through contemporary science. And this is a perfect example of saying, like, yeah, crop rotation is a thing, right? An important thing that they, however they figured it out, knew, even if they couldn't quite explain it. I'm going to push us a little bit forward into what I actually prepared for today, which is fine. So this is again from sort of the middle of Parshat Bechukotai in Leviticus. Does somebody want to read just this first little piece from Leviticus? Merrill.
And I will make your cities a waste, and will bring your sanctuaries unto desolation, and I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies that dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And you will I scatter among the nations, and I will draw out the sword after you, and your land shall be desolation, and your cities shall be a waste.
Uplifting, no?
Yeah, right.
Right. So one, as kind of Penina was alluding to it here, right, still connection to the land being desolate. What, any reactions to this? This is obviously sort of the negative consequences, right? This is the stick.
That if you let the land not be harvested, you're going to have problems. Maybe.
Okay.
I'm guessing. I'm going
to throw one thing out there. Again, not to be a downer. Most of this came to pass. Right? The first temple was destroyed. The second temple was destroyed. Right? 2 different periods of exile for our ancestors, and then in some ways a third. Diaspora Jews, far from the land of Israel for generations and generations. So you could certainly make a pretty reasonable case that maybe not 100%, but the overwhelming majority of what's outlined here in these 3 verses came to pass. So is that a result of not following the rules that come just before this?
Well, some of it might be, because we get in Deuteronomy later a kind of rationale for the fact that there were plagues, and there were expelling of people. I mean, in Judges, you see horrendous things happening because they're fighting one another, and there is no everyone did his own thing. That was among the people. So some of this is which we've said before, is consequences of your actions, but they're also, unfortunately, there are consequences not from your own actions, but this is a good blueprint. This is in an early stage of development, too, of the Israelite people, to scare them into, if you don't make your bed, you're going to get
right.
your head shot
No
off.
dessert for you, right?
Yeah.
If you don't brush your teeth, your teeth are going to fall out. I remember my life comes to mind. I had my hair cut last week, and I was telling the guy that cuts my hair that I brought my son Simon with me. He's going to be 3 next month, and so it's like his 3rd haircut. And Aaron, who cuts my hair, who has for whatever reason made it into a couple High Holy Day sermons, who's a Israeli guy, was trying to get Simon to hold his head still. And I have this vivid memory of being about a little older than Simon, probably 5 years old, at some like kids haircut place in Manhattan Beach. And this Russian woman cutting my hair, and she's cutting behind my ear. And I remember her saying, "Hold still or your ear goes on the floor." Right. And I remember being terrified that, my ear was going to get cut off, and right. Obviously it wasn't going to, right? But it's true, right? This is like, it's like the boogeyman's going to come get you if you don't do this. But clearly it didn't work because it happened. Now, is that a result of behavior? So the rabbis seem to suggest yes, right? So if we move down here to the second text, right? This is from the prayer book, from the prayer festival liturgy for Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. And this line that says, it's because of our transgressions, right? Because of our sins that we were exiled from the land and sent far, far away, right? And we've talked about this before, all the different rationales and reasons given for the destruction of the first temple, destruction of the second temple. Here's some of it, we'll get to in a minute. But, this is saying it is their fault. They did do something. This is a consequence of their actions. Yeah, right. And here also, Ibn Ezra, looking at this, the commentator says, right, that God's presence will turn away from us. And as a result, our cities are made desolate. And that once God's presence turns away, I think this is interesting, right? Those sanctuaries are yours, they're not mine. Right? That those holy places, are not about me anymore. They're yours. And, presumably do with it what you will. I thought I saw a hand. No.
Here, can I add something?
Please.
Okay. On the other hand, he also gives them an incentive that it's a happy incentive. And the holidays that are supposed to be when they give their crops, those holidays are actually the time that was the harvest time. If you are going to look through the holidays, you are going to see that it's divided. When they went up to Jerusalem to celebrate, it was harvesting. The Shavuot was the wheat, okay? And Sukkot, it was the winter vegetables. Tu B'Shvat is the trees, the fruit of the trees. And Rosh Hashanah, they used to do it was the time that they paid taxes. So they gave a cow or bull as tax to the celebration, to slaughter it, to eat it together, or to give some to the whatever, to bring it as an offering, but they ate it together. So every time that there was a big celebration, it was actually an harvesting time. So that's a very, and it's something that would stay on the calendar, which means that the hope was permanency. It's going to be something to look forward and to work for. And we have to always look at the positive. I look at the positive.
Absolutely. It also, I think, underscores the importance of place, right? Because those are three festivals that traditionally the three pilgrimage festivals in which people travel to Jerusalem to make these, sacrifices, offerings, tithing, what have you, that could only be done there. That's part of the reason that the destruction of the temple, first temple, second temple, and the exile is
to uproot them.
Catastrophic.
Yes.
Frankly. So catastrophic for our ancestors because it completely shatters that paradigm. And ultimately leads to the creation of what we now call rabbinic Judaism, right? But this, I think, in some ways really highlights our people's connection to place and to the land.
That's it.
And
turn it from shepherds to farmers.
Right.
From nomads, from caravan drivers or leaders or whatever you want to call it, into people that sit there and become farmers and make connection with the land. That's it.
Only arguably to then wander again. Right. And I mean, we'll say more about this in a minute, but not lost on me. I think that, we just celebrated Israel's 75th anniversary, Yom Ha'atzmaut, right? And obviously, horrific things happening in Israel right now. And
every holiday it's going to happen. They are doing it on purpose. Every holiday there is going to be some kind of a disruption and worse, and then there's a retaliation. But if you're going to pay attention, it's every holiday. It's an on purpose. to ruin the holidays for us. That's it.
So let's look at Rashi here. Anybody want to read this? Otherwise, I will. But all right. So Rashi says, looking at this, right, that this phrase, "and your land will be desolate, remain desolate." He says that this implies that you're not going to come back to it, at least not soon, and that is why the cities, seemingly are laid to waste, or seem like waste to us. And he compares, he says that when someone is exiled from his house or from his vineyard, from his city, that there's a piece of it that knows that he will ultimately return to it, or hopes that he will ultimately return to it. And as if it were not, completely obliterated. And speaks to this bit of hope, I think, which kind of gets back to, I forget who made the comment earlier, that there is a bit of an upswing to this, right? Which we're going to get deeper into in just a moment. But this, I think, is the beginning of this sense of hope, which one could argue is what sustained our people in exile time and time again. This sense that, one day, and I just said Israel's 75th, right? Think about the national anthem, think about Hatikva, right? Literally the hope, right? This dream and hope of being back in the land, being, and that's what in so many ways was embodied in Israel's independence. And to bring it back to this Torah portion, when we get to the very end of all these curses and all these horrible things that God's going to do if we don't follow the rules, God then says, "And I will remember my covenant with Jacob. I will also remember my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land." Even then, even when you are spread out in diaspora in the land of your enemies, I'm not going to reject you. I'm not going to spurn you. I'm not going to destroy you. I'm not going to, annul the covenant with you, because, I'm God, and I will remember you with favor, and remember the covenant with favor, the covenant I had with all your ancestors who I freed from the land of Egypt. So, does that then just negate everything that came before? Is God saying, none of that really matters because I'm not going anywhere? Rebecca.
What comes to mind is that land is always a constant. Even if the nuclear waste or drought or flood or whatever, the land is always a constant entity. And so it would always be there despite what came before it. The land would always be there.
True. We think about that the land has seen a lot, right? Lived a lot of lifetimes, right? It is a constant. But I don't know, how does this sit with what just came before for people? Does this negate it?
I don't think it negates it. I think it's one more way that God is trying to teach us.
Say more.
That I'm God, and I make the rules that I'm hoping you follow, but you have to learn from what I've taught you. It kind of goes all the way back to Noah and the ark. God had a reason for creating the floods, and we're all these years further, and he still has to teach people how to behave and how to manage themselves. People don't get the message. So this, to me, is just one more way that God is saying, here's what I'm doing, but you have to learn from it in order to live on your own, or in order to survive.
In order to have a certain level of independence.
Right.
Right. I can't help but think when I read this of almost sort of that parent-child relationship, right? That parents telling their children, look, no matter what you do, I'm not going to I will always love you, right? I may not love what you did, but I will always love you, right? You always have a home here. You never have to, something to that effect, right? And maybe that's sort of what God is saying here, that look, even if all this horrible, even if you do break all the rules and do all of this and you're exiled and whatnot, it's not over. I'm not going to abandon you. We're still in this relationship. I'm not going anywhere. Susan.
Yes, that's what I was going to say, but it's also, if there is no hope, then the people can still be, well, this is the way it's going to be, so I can still, steal and cheat and misbehave, and that's
or revert to some other, right? They'll still be, Judaism
exactly.
1.0, revert to whatever paganite, Canaanite ways,
May as well do that. Maybe there'll be more comfort in the pagans than there is here. So isn't this usually a formula in a way too with
It
prophets? This is in the Tanakh, but the Torah, but it comes in the prophets too, I think too, you're bad, you're doing this, and then often usually at the end, there's a ray of hope, but if you follow my ways and so on, then there's hope for you. So I'm just saying a pattern.
Absolutely, right. This is, I'll throw in a quick quote here from the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, blessed memory, who says that these, exactly what you just said, Susan, right? That this repetition, right? If you do this, if after all of this, if after everything that happens, that it's, one after another that sort of really drive this point home. He says all the more so, right? So much of this did come to pass in Jewish history, right?
Yeah.
Did happen, and yet he points out that all this litany of curses ends with this profound promise of ultimate consolation. That despite everything, God won't break God's covenant with the Jewish people, and that collectively, the Jewish people will be eternal. And that despite suffering, of which there's been much in our history, we're still here. And despite exile, eventually there will be a return. And, it's poetic in one sense, but maybe there's something to that, right? I mean, when's the last time you met a Mesopotamian? I don't know any other civilizations from, 2,000 years ago, really, that are wandering around today. So I don't know. Thoughts there? All right, we're going to go a little further. So here's a question, because I think it speaks to us today, perhaps. Certainly for the rabbis, the idea of exile and Jews being in diaspora, living in initially in Babylonia and then all over the place, was always a bad thing, or something that they mourned, right? And absolutely this hope that we've spoken of, and desire to return to a homeland at some point, right? That's a prayer in a traditional prayer book, right, every day. But here, Daniel Boyarin, who's a historian at Berkeley, I think, but noted Jewish historian, suggests that the ability to live in diaspora and to thrive, one could argue, in diaspora, is perhaps the greatest contribution that Jews have made to the world, is to demonstrate the ability to live, thrive, and yet remain Jewish, right? When, one might assume that living in diaspora, assimilation would be a fait accompli. So he goes so far here as to say that it's not, not monotheism is not the greatest gift that Jews gave to the world. It's this idea of diaspora, that it can teach us that it's possible for a people to maintain its distinctive culture, its difference, without controlling land, without controlling other people, or developing a need to dispossess them of their lands, right, in the way that many other empires have, right? Interestingly, and then fallen in most cases. Stacy, I think I saw your hand.
that particular section that Daniel or Jonathan Boyarin just highlighted, to me, my first reaction reading that is that Judaism is a religion of tolerance. They don't have to control other people. They can live with other people. Doesn't have to be their way or the highway. That's something that spoke to me from his words.
No, I think it's a beautiful sentiment. I think it's a beautiful sentiment, right? This notion that whether it's by circumstance or by belief, we've never felt the need as a people to impose our way of being upon others as a means of our own survival, right? We've always maintained our survival internally, as it were, right? And the Dalai Lama is famous for asking every rabbi he meets. Rabbi Leader can testify to this. He has had the pleasure of meeting the Dalai Lama. I have not, but that the Dalai Lama asks every rabbi he meets allegedly the same question, which is, how have the Jews managed to survive for thousands of years without a homeland when so many other peoples have not? And I would say, I believe that he's asking it from a place of enlightened self-interest, because he is of a people who, at the moment, don't have a homeland, and how do you maintain that continuity, that cohesiveness, when you don't have that? And I see two hands. I would suggest that perhaps it gets back to what we touched on a moment ago, and what maybe God is trying to give us in this text just above, which is hope, right? And Susan, that was sort of your point, right? That without the hope, then what's the point, right? But this belief, not just hope, but a belief that there will be a better day, a brighter day, and a brighter future, becomes something that is not only unifying, but perpetuates us forward as a people. Okay, let's see. Whose hands did I see? No, did they go down? No, I didn't see two hands. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine's up.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Mo.
This kind of reminds me of
Yeah.
when you move to another city or state.
Ooh, say more.
What's the first thing you do, because you don't know anyone?
Right.
Whatever the reason is that you're moving there, you may know somebody, but highly doubt it in a large capacity. You go looking for a community, and as Jews, we go looking for a synagogue.
Right.
Many of us do.
Community
Girl,
center.
you better than anybody remembers, because you came with me once to Yuma, Arizona. where
That was an
There
experience.
were plenty of Jews who were not looking for a community, because if they were, they would not have moved to Yuma, Arizona. But
Right.
you are 100%
And that's true anywhere we go, especially if you're in a city with a lot of, my parents had friends who lived in Los Angeles for, I can't tell you how many years, but they couldn't find one synagogue or one rabbi that was good enough for them.
Well,
what's
more Jewish than that?
Exactly. But that's the disturbing part, that we moved here and they couldn't believe that we found a place that satisfied us at that point.
Right.
It is what it
There's
is.
some old joke, right? I don't care what religion you or what synagogue you're a member of, as long as you're unhappy with it or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? As long as you're dissatisfied with it.
Right.
But I think I think it's a I think it's a very good point. Anybody who's a camp person might know. Rabbi Larry Milder famously wrote a song called "Wherever You Go, There's Always Someone Jewish."
Right.
And we do have a way of, all kidding aside, whether it's a synagogue or a deli, right, seeking out each other in new and strange places. Stacy, and then Ben.
Just one other thought that brought to mind in terms of this passage and the concept of tolerance is that Jews don't, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, proselytize.
Proselytize, yes, correct.
And I think that all ties in. We're not taking your land. We're not telling you what to do. We're not trying to impose our beliefs on you. And I think that whole, philosophical framework ties into this as well as the whole notion of tolerance is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Many of you know, just on that point, right? Many of you know that I created and run our conversion program. And so I spend a lot of time with people who are coming to Judaism who are not Jewish yet. And it's interesting because, yes, we're never going to proselytize. Chabad proselytizes to other Jews, right? Which is its own thing. But we do rely on this sense of attraction rather than, prescription, perhaps, right? That people observe Judaism or have a Jewish experience and then are perhaps attracted to it, motivated to learn more, versus us attempting to impose that upon someone else because we think it's better for them or something like that. Ben and then Rebecca.
Interesting discussion, Rabbi. Thank you. Just a quick comment following up on what Merle had to say. I also look for synagogues when I'm on vacation around the world, and you find them, and it just gives you
Absolutely
a good feeling. Or when I was way back when I was in school, the Hillel or something.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny you say that. I remember being a kid in Hebrew school. And many of you know this, some of you may not. I was not a star student. Believe me, nobody thought I was going to be a rabbi. I literally went kicking and screaming. But one of the things they always said was, we want you to know enough Hebrew and enough prayer book and that you can go into a synagogue anywhere in the world and feel comfortable. Was sort of that was always the phrase. And all these years later, it's the same thing we say to kids in our religious school. But it's true, right? It's true. I can remember. I remember walking to a synagogue in Buenos Aires. I remember walking to a synagogue in Amsterdam, right? And having no idea what was happening and not knowing the language of instruction, but knowing and feeling at home because of the liturgy, and that it's this common bond. Rabbi Leader, I think, has told this story about being in the Soviet Union, I believe it was, and when he was very young with a friend and going to find a synagogue for a festival. And, at first they were suspicious, wouldn't let him in, didn't it, right? And then suddenly the doors were flung open, right? And we always have a home. So I think that's a very astute point. Rebecca.
I just want to mention intermarriage because I just finished reading this book. And there was a period in time, according to this author, when rabbis were really concerned about intermarriage, and that the fact that the amount of people that still maintain their Jewish beliefs would diminish because of intermarriage. But according to this person, that really hasn't happened. And so I think that's a really curious point, in that even though a lot of Jewish people are intermarrying, which I did, I still have maintained my Jewish identity and faith. And is that based on the land? No. Is that based on tolerance? I don't know. Is it based on acceptance? What is it based on? I don't know.
So it's interesting, I think, and without throwing us into a lengthy discussion about intermarriage, because we could spend hours and hours on that. I think two things. I think, this notion that Boyarin points to of diaspora being this contribution, right? I mean, look at Jews in America, right? Jews in America been here about not quite 400 years, has led to the greatest, most successful, arguably, period in all of Jewish history, in which Jews have achieved, more success and have become the most successful, educated, affluent minority group in America. That, maybe couldn't happen anywhere else. And, creates this opportunity for assimilation. Look, there are plenty of rabbis today who think that intermarriage is the greatest threat to the Jewish people. And, there's all the demographic studies that the intermarriage rate is more than 50%, which in and of itself, to me, is just a fact, is not good or bad. The result of that in Jewish identity is maybe where the conversation is to be had. But I agree. I think that's a function of modernity. And I also think it's not new. I think we think of intermarriage as some 20th or 21st century, conundrum to the Jewish people. It's not new. I had a teacher once who posited, he said, it's not, just in the last century that Jews have been interested in intermarrying. He said, it's just in the last century that non-Jews were interested in marrying Jews, which is just, a little food for thought there. Panina, go ahead.
My granddaughter is dating, she's engaged to a guy who is not Jewish. So I always think to myself, okay, so she's Jewish, the kids are going to be Jewish, but she's asking questions. So I told her, I cannot tell her, you have to make him convert, because he doesn't want to anyhow. Not that I told him to or ask him to, but that's how she's talking. The way she's talking, I get it. So I couldn't tell her, I didn't want to tell her something negative. So I said, you know what? Her name is Harley. I said, you know what? I would study both and make him look into your faith and let you learn about his. And I think you should take wherever you think that will make the quality of your lives better. You should take those things out of both faith. And then you decide if you really want to make an efficient move toward one or another. But first of all, take a look and see, maybe there is a lot in Christianity that you'll think will make the quality of your life better before you say no to everything. That's what I told them.
Right.
And and the other one is the same thing. And and my grandson is not with a Jewish girl, but they are all very loving and friendly and interested. They always ask questions. And I always tell them, start with a Friday night Shabbat. And make sure you have a Friday night Shabbat, because everybody likes a good meal with wine and candles, and see what happens, I told her. Because I had a girlfriend who started like that with her daughter's husband, and the kids were bar mitzvah, and he loved it. To come to a Shabbos dinner, that was a big deal. So the Shabbat is a very big attraction. So start with that, I told her. See what happens later. Follow the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A Jewish home does not, I don't believe that a Jewish home
They always said
definitionally needs to have two Jewish parents.
Yeah. They always said that the way to the heart is through the stomach.
Many a Jewish mother has said such things. So I'm going to wrap us up, really just leaving us with this note of hope that I think really does, while, we began by sort of, looking at the text, and I think I made a joke, an offhanded joke about it being so uplifting, which certainly on the surface it's not. But I do think there's this optimistic hope in the parasha that is, despite what happens, we're not going anywhere as a people. And despite what happens, there is a hope of return from exile that, many, many people chose to see the birth of the state of Israel 75 years ago as that prophetic promise.
That's right.
Right. And so I'm going to end with another piece from Rabbi Lord Sachs, who says that Israel may suffer, Israel, not the nation, right? The people may suffer, but it will never die. It may experience exile, but one day it will return. It may undergo the most terrible persecution, but it will never have reason to despair. The placement of this prophecy at the culmination of all these curses in this week's Parsha is one of the most fateful of all biblical assertions, that no fate is so bleak as to murder hope itself. No defeat is final, no exile endless, and no tragedy the last word of the story. So I'm going to let Rabbi Sachs have the last word because it's better than anything I could come up with. And wish everyone Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Thank you. What an interesting discussion, Rabbi.
This was great.
Rabbi.
Thanks so much. Hope everything is okay with Rabbi Nanos's family or whoever.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.